Hi there. My name is Andrea Brockmeyer, and I'm the Director of Project Management at Watermark Learning. And I'll bet you are thinking about taking the PMP exam, and good for you. You're going to find that that is a great professional development move for you. It really helps you solidify your understanding of project management good practices and how you can apply them in your organizations to help them achieve their goals. And a big part of that, of course, is getting to an understanding of and comfort level with the project management body of knowledge, the PMBOK Guide. And the PMBOK Guide in its current 6th edition glory is something to behold. It is quite an undertaking to really digest all of this. So I wanted to put some thoughts together about how you can maybe break it apart a little bit to make it a little bit easier to read. Hopefully you're coming to a PMP certification prep class with me, and I will tell you that you will find it much less daunting coming to class if you are able to spend some time with the PMBOK and be familiar with it prior to getting to class. Folks that show up stone cold as to what's in the PMBOK, I can tell you are at a disadvantage when they get to class, because there's a lot of material that we cover. So you will be much further ahead and be very grateful for time that you spend with reading the PMBOK prior to getting to class. I think it's also worth noting that remember that the PMP exam is not specifically an exam on the PMBOK. The CAPM is, but the PMBOK Guide is a key source for what you need to know for the PMP, but the PMP is not specifically an exam on the PMBOK. It's a test on the application of those good practices. Nevertheless, you need to have a good, solid understanding of what's in there. A lot of that has to do with the language and the terminology, and really becoming comfortable with that, because a lot of the things you may recognize the practices, but perhaps you didn't call them that. Or you may recognize some of the artifacts, but perhaps you didn't call them that. So you're moving in the right direction, you're doing the right thing. So hopefully a couple of tips here as to how you can break this thing down, make it a little easier to digest. So the first thing I would recommend is to take a look at the table of contents, things like maybe a self-evident thing, but sometimes we gloss over that. You don't need to spend a ton of time with it, but just take a look at what's in there. Be familiar with how it's organized. You'll see that there's a lot of repetition in terms of the content, particularly in part 1, in terms of all of the processes. So that can be very helpful. It also will set you up for being able to more quickly go back when you maybe want to look at something or look something up. You'll have a sense of kind of how it's organized. One of the first things you'll notice is that there are 3 key parts to the PMBOK: part 1, part 2, and part 3. So I would recommend starting with part 1, the first 68 pages. And that includes the introduction, talks about programs, projects, portfolios, talks about the project environment, the role of the project manager. It's some good table setting stuff. So I would take a look first at those pages. Then I would move ahead to part 2, which is called the standard. And that's pages 539 to 635. And it includes some high-level concepts again. And then it goes by, it identifies or describes the processes in project management organized by process group. So the upshot of the project management body of knowledge is it's 49 processes that have been identified as the good practices in project management. That is, these are things that work well on most projects most of the time. And so those 49 processes are organized in a couple of different ways. And one way to organize them is by process group, which is how they're presented in part 2. Now it's a little higher level presentation. In addition to, again, some introductory things, they go through the processes. They talk about the benefit of the process, which is a really good way to think about them. Then it talks about some inputs and outputs. It doesn't go into all the minutia around the tools and techniques, however. That's the primary reason why it's much shorter than the presentation of the processes in part 1. But I would go ahead and read part 2. The exam itself is actually organized by process group or domain, as they call them. So take a look at that, and then I would go back to part 1, the first the second part of part 1 there, starting on page 69 rather. And that's where it will go through all of those 49 processes organized by knowledge area in great detail. And that's the part that can get a little daunting. It feels very repetitious, which it is. You don't need to spend prior to class, you don't need to spend time memorizing all of that. But I would read it, kind of get a sense, get a tempo with it, and kind of get a sense of the presentation of those processes and all the details around them in that last part of part 1. So overall, I mentioned those 49 processes, and there is a table here that you are going to need to be comfortable with. You are going to need to know this. You're going to need to know what's on here and how these processes are organized. So this table is both on page 25 of part 1, and it's on page 556 in the standard. So it presents those 49 processes that are across the top here are the process groups. And so, as I said, in part 2, it's going to go through the processes, first the initiating processes, then the planning processes, then the executing, then monitoring, controlling, and closing. Okay. The second part of part 1, starting on page 69, is going to present the processes organized by knowledge area. So it's going to first talk about the integration processes, and then the scope management processes, and schedule management. So it'll go by knowledge area. So same processes, just organized different ways. So again, you're going to need to really be comfortable with this table and be able to say that managed quality is an executing process that's part of the project quality management knowledge area. By the time you take the test, you may not be there by the time you show up to class, but if you can spend some time with the PMBOK, this table, and read through it, you'll be a lot closer. It'll make a lot more sense. So there are also then some appendices in part 3. You don't need to spend time with this prior to class. We can talk more about what's in there. A lot of it is the same material, consolidated or assembled or put together in a little different way. So it's some things that pertain, for example, to each knowledge area, and then just all of those across the knowledge areas are collected in an appendix. But again, you don't need to spend time with this prior to class, but just be aware that those are there for your information. They may be more helpful actually later on. So my pop quiz question then, what is more fun than studying for a PMI exam? And the answer, of course, is everything. Everything is more fun than studying for a PMI exam. So my number 1 tip for preparing for a PMI exam is to make that commitment to get it done, get your application done as soon as you can, get your exam scheduled as soon as you can, and then absolutely make a commitment to doing a little something every day to prepare it, even if it's just reading flashcards for 5 minutes. To do something every day of the week, 7 days of the week, every 24-hour period, at least one little thing for each box on the calendar for each day. Because what happens is everything is more interesting and more enjoyable perhaps than studying for this. So it's very easy to get distracted. And once one day gets away from you, 2 days, 3 days, then you find yourself kind of having to catch up. And you really need to have a steady drip of this stuff on your mind and just to be really immersed in that until you get it done. And so that's what I've personally found to be the most helpful, and that's the advice I have been giving my students for many, many years now. And that's what I've got. I hope that helps you. So this good stuff. It's just a matter of, how are you gonna get through it. So I hope this has been helpful. I would love to hear back from you as to how my suggestions worked for you. Or perhaps you've got another approach. I'd love to hear what you do on your PMP journey. So good luck to you. I hope to see you in class, and all the best in your certification pursuit. Thanks.